Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus, your new essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish new episodes twice weekly. Join us on Friday for a concise news briefing and on Monday for in-depth analysis covering airlines, defense, and aerospace. My name is Amber Elias, and joining me for this news-focused episode is FlightGlobal's Dominic Perry. Dom, welcome to this episode.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Let's take a look at the top aviation stories this week on FlightGlobal. The US Navy is funding research into a new science project that at first glance sounds almost magical, turning seawater into jet fuel. It might seem like science fiction, but the Pentagon's Naval Research Lab thinks shipboard fuel synthesis could be possible and is providing research and development funds to explore utilizing this technology in operations. Air Tanzania seeks nearly 70 pilots as part of a large crew recruitment campaign to support its expanding route network. The airline is offering 23 captain positions, 45 first officer positions, and 100 cabin crew, of which 20 positions required Chinese-speaking or French-speaking personnel. Embraer plans for US assembly of the KC-390 in hopes of securing a US Air Force next-generation tanker contract. The Brazilian airframer told FlightGlobal it already has site plans developed at multiple locations across the US that could support KC-390 production and are 100% committed to investment in the US. Dom, you recently travelled to the Czech Republic to learn more about a new sustainability development at Honeywell. What do we need to know about Project Newborn?
Well, Newborn's a really interesting program that Honeywell is leading, and it's attempting to develop a high-powered fuel cell powertrain, if that isn't overly repetitious, that's suitable for aviation. So it would be using liquid hydrogen to run fuel cells to generate electricity, to then in turn drive a propeller. So you could see in the long run, this might be able to be a solution where we see regional aircraft replacing their gas turbine engines with this cleaner zero emission solution.
Sustainability is obviously a huge part of the future of aviation. However, the EU's Clean Aviation Body has yet to confirm future investment for the second phase of testing for Project Newborn. How important is investment from the EU for this type of fuel project?
It's really vital, I think, for a project of this nature, because at the moment, there isn't a clear-cut market for the product. So I think without public backing or public funding for these efforts, then it becomes very difficult for a private company like Honeywell or whoever, to be frank, to put their own money forward for something that doesn't necessarily have a buyer at the end of it. Now, that's not to say that they won't, but the more money you can throw at something, the quicker a result can be achieved. So the EU really has to decide, or Clean Aviation has to decide, where it wants to put its funding for this second phase. The problem is, of course, that there are an infinite number of competing projects or requirements that need cash. And it's not just about zero emission. It could be lower emission. And do some of those priorities take over from this less proven technology, if you see what I mean? If we can make a normal gas turbine engine 25% better, is that a better use of funding than for something like the Newborn system, where the outcome is much less certain?
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that new technology, new fuel technology, it's been on the horizon in aviation for quite some time. There is constantly new developments from private companies as well as government schemes like the EU's Clean Aviation Body. But when can we expect to see something like Newborn from Honeywell enter into service? Or is there something we can expect to see a bit sooner?
That's a bit of a chicken and an egg type question, because something like hydrogen as a fuel isn't really governed by the tech, or isn't entirely governed by the technology. While it seems that a fuel cell powertrain is feasible and others have done it at smaller scale, the problem with hydrogen is the availability of the fuel. If that isn't there, then what airline or other operator is going to choose a hydrogen powertrain if they can't get the fuel and they can't get the fuel affordably? That's the real stumbling block. And it's all wrapped together. And unless everything happens, then the whole system isn't quite as viable as you might hope. Everyone knows where they can get jet fuel at the moment, but the same isn't true of hydrogen. So the whole infrastructure needs to come along with the technology if we're going to see this in service. Now, that doesn't mean it won't happen, of course, but the timeline is a little bit unclear. You could say 2035, maybe, but it really depends on the size of the system. Others making or developing lower power systems for a different class of aircraft, well, that could come into service before the end of the decade, maybe. But again, nothing about this is terribly clear at the moment. So it's a bit of a wait and see game.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that all these sustainability efforts are all wrapped together and rely on each other to actually sort of see practical improvements and its sort of practical implementation within aviation really does imply that government investment and big body investment from multinational corporations, even privately, needs to come with the technology because, as you say, the industry can't really move forward if it's going piece by piece. It really has to go in lockstep with all the elements of aviation.
Completely. There needs to be a really coherent approach and an almost across the board buy-in from all the stakeholders, which sounds like terrible management jargon. But what I mean is that if the aircraft manufacturers know what they want, the regulators know what they want, the technology and system developers know what they want, and the fuel providers know what they want and can provide, then this all moves forward. But if you remove one of those pieces, then everything becomes much slower.
I think at FlightGlobal, we're eternally optimistic about sort of the future of a more sustainable aviation industry. I know that you've been covering aerospace and aviation for a long time. And every time that we get a little glimpse of something that might come together from, as you say, a holistic approach, it's got the government regulatory, it's got private industry, airlines interested as well. I always feel like we get a bit hopeful, but we're yet to see something really change the industry in a meaningful way for a more sustainable industry.
I think we'll get there. And I don't want to play down the progress that's being made, but I suspect everything takes a lot longer than everyone hopes. It's just that the nature of a highly regulated industry like aviation, that it's always going to be slightly harder and slightly more difficult than everyone hoped at the outset. But we'll get there.
Dom, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of FlightGlobal Focus.
No, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal with audio editing by Lucy Johnson. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com and more information can be found in the show notes. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.